Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. It is great to be here with you in your group. Last time I was with you in your group, we were in person, and here we are. I'm actually in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the moment, but that almost really doesn't matter. So here we are, and we're going to talk about employee engagement, about retention, about recruitment, and about some of the weird things that are going on in the world of the workplace today. So again, the title of the presentation is Contented Cows Give Better Milk, which is the name of the book that I wrote a number of years ago and have updated it a couple of times since. But I want to be very clear about the premise of this presentation today. And that is very simply this: that creating a focused, engaged, and capably led workforce is one of the best things any organization can do for your bottom line. Before we roll into all the things that we'll be talking about, and there is going to be quite a lot of detail and some things that I'm going to give you some instructions and some assignments and things that I want you to be able to take back from this experience today, to be able to put into place and see if it will help you in order to attract, retain, and engage the very best people to work in your clubs. Before we do that, I kind of want to take the temperature of where we are right now with respect to everything that's gone on in the last 17 months. And so Bree is going to put the first Mentimeter question up on the screen for you. And what you will see on your phones, just as soon as that slide changes, you should see the question changing on your phone, asking you, what one word would you use to describe the past 17 months? Go ahead and just start typing that in, and we will see your responses right away on the screen. Wow. And you'll notice that the larger the font in the word, the more people said that exact same word. So what we're seeing right now is the main word is challenging. We're also seeing chaos, adapting. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of adapting and probably a lot more adapting yet to come. Challenging, chaos, transformative. And I see some people are entering some things in the chat. That's good as well. So I see chaotic, chaos, transformative, interesting, uncertainty, learning experience. As those words continue to come in, it looks to me like challenging is the biggest one. And so I want to talk about how we can address some of those challenges that continue to be with us, and who knows what's going to happen in the next few months. So thank you, Bree. We can take that off the screen now and go forward. And I want to be, again, very clear about what we're talking about in this presentation today. And a lot of it has to do with employee engagement. So I want to talk about really 3 questions about this word engagement that we've been using for the last 15 years or so. Employee engagement, engagement in general. And so I want to try to answer 3 questions. First of those is, what is it? What is engagement? Secondly, what good is it? And third, how do I get it? So if that makes sense, that's the direction we're going to go. Now, I could give you a great big long textbook definition of engagement, and it would sound a little bit like the degree to which somebody is emotionally invested in their work and all that. But I'm not going to give you that kind of a definition. Instead, I think sometimes a picture can do just as well as anything else. Folks, this is engagement. And just to show you that I'm an equal opportunity presenter, this is engagement. This is not. Okay, easy to see the difference. Engagement, not engagement, right? So now for me, really, the whole issue is when we talk about what engagement is, I want you to think about how into your job are you? And you have people in your clubs who are really into it. They've been there for a long time, or maybe they haven't been there for a long time, but they're really into it, and they're going above and beyond, and they're doing all kinds of things. And frankly, you have some people who are a little out of it. And we want to make sure that you have more people who are into it. And yet over the last 17 months, as you just said, it has been challenging. It has been chaotic. All kinds of things have happened. And here we were in March of 2020, and suddenly we were visited by this enormous disruption. And there we were, like deer in the headlights, with all of this going on, and very quickly had to adapt. That was another word that came up, was adaptation. And you adapted quickly. Everybody had to. And in the midst of all of that, everybody was fighting and disagreeing about so much. We had disagreements about the virus, about the vaccine. It was still about the vaccine. We had political disagreements. People were disagreeing about everything. And yet I think we can probably admit that there were at least a few things that we all agreed on. And then we ended up going into a real situation of transformation. So if we think back to about September of last year, you made all kinds of changes. You had to. You adapted, you transformed into where you were then. And then, you know, it was funny because we thought, I was like this, you probably were like this. Along about September, October, we thought, okay, well, just the minute that ball drops in Times Square on January 1st, it's all going to be over. And I saw this sign, which I think speaks to that particular issue. And yet here we are in July of 2021, and it is not over. And who knows what's going to happen in the next coming months. And so I think what that means is that now we have moved from that disruption through transformation now into adaptation. And you see the problem, you know the problem, and so much of it has to do not so much with the virus itself, but with everything that has happened since March of 2020. And so I also started to hear, and I don't know, maybe you were one who said this, and maybe you heard this as well, but I started to hear people saying, well, you know, we're just not going to do anything in our business right now. We're not going to hire. We're not going to develop. We're not going to grow. We're not going to do any training. We're not going to change anything because we're walking up this hill. We're going up this hill, and we're going to be to the top of that hill pretty soon. And once we get to the top of the hill, then we're going to go back to business as usual. And I think we all discovered at some point, there is no hill. There is no hill. We need to forget about that hill. We need to continue to go on and to make changes and to make improvements and to develop and to hire and retain and to create a great organization to work for and a great club for your members and for their guests. And so I look at it a little bit like ships approaching the horizon. So rather than waiting till we get at the top of that hill, let's move on through that horizon and make improvements to our organizations. Now, in just a little bit, or at the end of this presentation today, you're going to have the opportunity to download some key takeaways that we're talking about today. So I love it when I see people taking notes, and please feel free to take pictures and screenshots and anything you like. But at the end, I'm going to give you a link where you can go. You'll be able to actually download my slide deck. You'll be able to download a 3-page key takeaways document that will have the key points that we talked about. And there will be some other items that you will be able to download as well. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Now, you know, it's really easy to say our workplace, our main asset is our people. We hear that all the time. Our employees are our most valuable asset. And that's easy enough to say. But if you're going to say that, people are going to be looking for the evidence. Now, a number of years ago, I established a goal to visit all 50 states. I was successful with that goal. And so one of the states I visited, obviously, was the state of Nebraska. And I have a picture to prove it. As you can imagine, I have about like 50 of these. But my point in showing you this, so here my wife took this picture of me standing on the border between South Dakota and Nebraska. You'll notice the sign says, Nebraska, home of Arbor Day. I don't know about you, but I don't buy it. I mean, if you're going to say the home of Arbor Day, I'm going to at least be looking for some trees. And so I want you to be very clear that you can say yours is a great club to work for, but people are going to be looking for the evidence. I want to talk about some of that evidence and new evidence coming forward as we move into these very unprecedented and unusual times. So a few years ago, I was speaking at a hotel. This was a hotel that claimed that their employees were their most valuable asset. It was funny though, because as I drove into the parking lot, this is what I was greeted by. Now, I took that picture myself. That is not from Google Images, and I didn't like Photoshop that. That was the picture that I took. A few years after that, I was also speaking at the Marriott in downtown Philadelphia. And right on the main street there where that hotel is located is the employee entrance. And that's what it looks like. I just want you to think, which place would you rather go to work? Which place do you think has an easier time finding and keeping employees? So sometimes it can just be something as simple as that, but it's all in the way that you approach your employees, your culture, your organization. And do you have a strategy around being a great workplace? And so I get the question often, Richard, what is our best recruiting tool, especially today? I'll tell you, it's not Indeed, it's not Monster, it's not Glassdoor, it's none of those things. Your best recruiting tool is your reputation as an employer. Your reputation as an employer. And yet it is the reality of what it's like to work for your organization that will determine your ability to attract, retain, and engage the very best talent. Reputation recruits, but reality retains. Reputation recruits, but reality retains. So I want us to go into some breakout groups in just a moment. And Bree is going to give you information and instructions on that. We're going to go into some groups, and I want you to ask yourselves in those groups 2 questions. Here are the questions. You may want to jot them down. They also will be available for you when you get there. But as you know, you won't be able to see the slide presentation when you get into the breakout rooms. Those 2 questions are this. I want you in your groups, and there should be about 5 or 6 of you in a group. In your groups, I want you to discuss quickly, and you're going to have 5 minutes to do all of this. So discuss quickly, what are some elements, some characteristics of a great workplace? A great workplace is this. They have this. This is what people are looking for in a great workplace. Secondly, I want you to talk about some real organizations that you are familiar with. They may be famous organizations. They might not be famous organizations, but companies, organizations, employers that you are familiar with either because you've worked there, you know somebody who's worked there, you know something about them, you've read something about them, or maybe you're a customer and you just imagine this might be a great place to work. I want you to make a list of a couple of those. And I want you to think about the wide range of industries from hospitality, food service, airlines, high tech, manufacturing, services, any of those things, and make a quick list of some places you think are great places to work. We're going to come back and talk about that after you're finished. So, Bree, if you would take us into those breakouts and give us some instructions.
Yeah, we'll actually have to change this to a group discussion because the breakouts weren't enabled on this.
Oh, I see. Okay,
account.
I'm sorry.
Can we create an account, just a group discussion instead?
Okay, so let's just do that then as a group, and if we can just have people raise their hands, and let's just talk about this as all of us. What are some elements of a great place to work? Just if you know how to. All right, so Renee is saying care, Shane recognition, Thomas inclusive. Great. Again, Renee talking about appreciation. Melissa says positive leadership. And boy, Renee's got a lot of good ideas. Feedback. Barb says great orientation process. We're going to talk about that, definitely. D. Clapper, growth. Dustin is saying active managers. Absolutely. S. Nicholson. Wow, we're getting all kinds of good things in the chat. Let me actually let me put the chat thing over on the side so I can see all of this. Great. Leaders as role models, the club values, innovative, communication, core values, transparency, innovation, inspiration, integrity, empowerment. Keep going. Competitive wages. I'm glad somebody said that. We got to talk about that, whether we want to or not. Care and trust, a great staff. Leading by example. Excellent. Transformative teams. Fun. I'm glad somebody said that one too. Nadine says, yeah, fun environment. Bill says, all people working together toward the same vision. A learning culture, follow through, strong ongoing follow up with new team members after orientation. That is so critically important. I'm glad that we have some awareness around that in the group. Work-life balance, a welcoming break room. There you go. You're in the hospitality business. Let's be hospitable to the people who work with us. employee involvement, everyone engaged, career growth. Excellent. So we're getting a lot of great ideas here in terms of what are some elements of a great place to work. Good family meals. Let's switch the conversation and ask this question. What are some specific places that you might think of that you would say, I think these probably are great places to work? And in real quick chat, if you can just put maybe why you think that is the case. All right, so someone said the Ritz. Yeah, we know the Ritz has a legendary reputation for being a great place to work. They talk about ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. Chick-fil-A, definitely known as a great place to work. Chick-fil-A employees are the happiest. And you got to wonder, what is it that makes them so happy? I know they're closed on Sunday. We'll talk about Chick-fil-A. I don't think it's only because they're closed on Sunday that their employees are so happy. Google, Brightline, experience a lot of positive energy and compassion. Great service. That is really good to know from an internet provider like Brightline. Southwest Airlines, again, another legendary one that we hear about a lot. Disney, of course, we know that in Florida, the happiest place on earth. Virgin Atlantic, I would agree with that. Again, Ed is saying immediate empowerment to fix issues without having to consult management at Ritz-Carlton. I wonder to what degree our employees in your clubs have that same thing. So it's very interesting when we talk about companies like Google. That's a great example. Google has been known for many of the last 10 years as the best company to work for in America, based on the survey that Fortune magazine publishes each year. The interesting thing about a company like Google, I think Google is a great place to work for a very narrow range of people. Most people, in fact, would not enjoy working for Google. The good thing about Google is they have a really good way of getting only those who have the potential to be happy, productive, and successful working at Google, working there. And there's a real lesson for us here. Not everyone is going to be happy, productive, and successful working in your club. Our challenge is to make sure that we get only those people who do have that potential working in your club, and it'll make a huge, huge difference. Someone said Starbucks. Yes, we even have visuals for those kinds of suggestions. So thank you for that. I wanted to just kind of get your view of kind of where you were in terms of what the great places to work are and what you think makes a great place to work. So let's talk about this whole contented cows thing, and what does that mean, and what are we talking about with contented cows? First thing I have to tell you is, well, the first book that Bill Catlin and I wrote came out in 1998. I can't believe that. It's called Contented Cows Give Better Milk. I have to tell you that the book has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with cows. And so, and a point I really want to press and make, and I'm serious about this, is we are not, as some people have suggested, comparing your employees to cows. We would never do that. We are not saying employees are cows, nor should they be compared to cows. What we are saying is that in the same way that contented cows do give better milk, and that's been pretty well scientifically established, satisfied, engaged employees give better performances at work, and that always finds its way to your members and guests, and it always finds its way to your bottom line. So the first book came out all those many years ago, and then a number of years later, we came out with a sequel to that. But the actual phrase contented cows comes from Carnation Milk. And we use the phrase contented cows with the express written consent of the Carnation Company, now owned by Nestle, and which requires us to say this in every presentation that I make. So we've done that. No, they've been great to work with. So a few years later, the publisher asked us to update, refresh the book. And so the newest book is called Contented Cows Still Give Better Milk. And all we're saying there is that organizations that have a strategy, an intentional and deliberate way of creating the workplace in such a way that it attracts and retains others, those organizations make more money and they have better operational results for their customers, in your case, for their members, for their guests. So let's talk a little bit about how that happens and what maybe you can do to make that happen. Now, these are the companies that we looked at in our original, or in our study. You will recognize most of them there. In fact, you've got Starbucks, you've got Disney, you've got Google, all those that you just mentioned on this list. Here's what we found when we did an intense study over a 10-year period of these organizations compared to the economy as a whole. We found that these companies grew faster, they had better financial results, they had better employee engagement, lower turnover, and they recruited more talented employees. Another big thing that we saw was the effect on turnover of organizations that are intentional and strategic about creating a great place to work. So let's just take a couple of examples. If we take supermarkets just for a moment, the supermarket industry experiences about 86% turnover per year. But there is a supermarket, and we don't have any of these in Florida, but you may be familiar with Wegmans. Wegmans experiences about 17% turnover per year. And you have to ask the question, what are they doing? I mean, it's a grocery store, for Pete's sake. It's a grocery store. However, this grocery store in 2006 was named the very best company to work for in the United States of America. And since then, they have never fallen below number 10 on Fortune's list of 100 best places to work. I think you probably know when it comes to quick service restaurants, 110% annual turnover in that business. I mean, think about that. You know, I mean, you drive up to window number 1 to order your hamburger and fries. And by the time you get over to window number 2 to pick them up, the person you ordered them from has already initiated a career change. I mean, how do you manage a group of people that turns over that quickly? Well, you probably know who's going to appear on this slide here. And that is, as you've already mentioned, Chick-fil-A, 60% employee turnover. So I think we have to ask the question, what are these organizations doing that makes such a difference? And if you ask me what I think is going to be the fastest route to creating that kind of environment that makes real bottom line difference to your organization, it's leadership. It's not about having bring your pet to work day. It's not about having nap rooms. It's not entirely about compensation and benefits, although it is becoming more so with that. And we're definitely going to talk about that. But at the highest level, it is about leadership. And when people ask me, well, Richard, what do you mean by leadership? Well, we could talk literally for days about what we mean by leadership, but I want to give you a very simple definition. My simple definition of leadership is that it is the earned consent of followers. And so I love what you said in the chat earlier about involved management, about active management. And this is one of the things that we find more and more, especially in businesses like yours, that the more actively involved every leader is at every level with all of the employees, the more likely those people are to be engaged, to stay, to do a better job, and to create better results for your business. So it's time to go back to Mentimeter, and I want to ask you a really important question here. And that is, what did the pandemic teach you about leadership? Bree, could we have the Mentimeter change that and go back? And here, I'm just going to ask you to type in a few words, just a couple of words or so. What did this whole everything in the last 17 months or so teach you about leadership? This one will take a little longer as people begin to type things in. So I'm getting that. Bree is telling you, showing you the code there, and we're getting people entering some things now that say, okay, people count, embrace the change. It's a fragile world. Leadership needs to be on steroids during a crisis. Isn't that the truth? We don't always have the answer. Good for you who said that. Be empathetic. Teamwork is essential. Be nimble. It requires flexibility, resilience. If you have good leadership, you can handle and adapt to almost anything. Be supportive, understand. It requires, again, flexibility, compassion. Be open-minded, Indra is saying. Resilience. Be supportive, understand all needs. All right, we're getting some good answers here coming in. Keep entering those things in and they will continue to show up on the screen. Appreciate your participation in this. Cooperation and understanding, work-life balance, be nimble. We'll just let this roll for the next moment or two.
We also have a couple comments in the chat.
Okay, some other comments coming into the chat. Creativity and respect, accept change, be open-minded. Don't try to control the chaos, be a part of the chaos and learn from it. Creativity, adaptable, excellent. Well, crisis creates conformity, interesting. Leadership during times like these is more important than ever. Well, I've always believed that leadership is the one thing that makes that organization a great place to work, whatever the organization is. And I think we've learned, and I'm glad that people were open to learning during this crisis, that leadership more important than ever before. Great. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and take that off. By the way, after we are finished with everything, as part of my follow-up, I will send all of the Mentimeter results, everything that you said. I'll send that to Beth, and she'll be able to share that with you. So when we talk about leadership, one of the things people ask me, all right, so Richard, what is it about leadership that creates differences in people's behavior? What is it about the organization and about the culture of the organization that actually can be translated to differences in people's behavior that will then translate into better results for the organization? And Bill Catlett, my co-author and business partner, and I strongly believe that it has a lot to do with something called discretionary effort. Discretionary effort. I want to talk about that term because for HR nerds like me, it's a great term. We get very excited about it, but let me just break it down a little bit. Discretionary effort is a term that was coined in the early 1900s by a group of industrial psychologists who were looking at how people chose to do their work at different levels. And they defined discretionary effort. Listen to this. They defined discretionary effort as that increment of human effort, the expenditure of which is at the exclusive discretion of the worker. It is, in fact, what we want to do rather than what we have to do. It's what we do because we want to do it, not because we have to do it. I have depicted it mathematically on the screen as the difference between that of which we are capable and that which is required of us. See this gap right here, folks? This is discretionary effort. And the interesting thing about it, this is the most profitable morsel of effort that your people can offer to you, because by definition, you cannot pay for discretionary effort. Now, as we get talking about compensation, benefits, wages, and how all of that is impacting our current today, it's going to be really important to understand the importance and the need to get as much discretionary effort from people as possible. So engagement and discretionary effort. Engagement is related to discretionary effort. They are not synonymous, but discretionary effort is a big part of engagement. So there are a few things that we know about engagement. And one of those things is that engagement is a conscious decision. Engagement is a conscious decision. We get up in the morning, and all of your employees get up in the morning and they decide, how much of my discretionary effort am I going to give to my employer today at the club, and how much am I going to keep in reserve for myself? Our jobs as leaders is to get people to part with as much discretionary effort as much of the time as possible. The other thing we know about engagement is that while work is contractual, engagement is deeply personal. There's just no getting away from that. And I think many of you have commented on things like that in the chat already, saying that it really is about how do you care about your employees, and about work-life balance, and about all of the things that make up the whole person, not just the employee part of the person. I learned a really important lesson about this a number of years ago when I went to visit a Wegmans supermarket in upstate New York. I had heard so much about Wegmans being a great place to work, so I decided to go on a tour of a grocery store. I lead a very exotic life, yes. And so I was going to be in the Syracuse area. And so I contacted this Wegmans and I said, listen, I'd like to come and learn a little bit more about your store and about your organization. And they said, sure, come on in, 2 o'clock, we'll give you the grand tour. Well, I decided I wanted to go in a little ahead of my appointment because I don't know if they said, hey, this author guy is coming in here, so everybody, be on your best behavior or what. I just wanted to go in, I didn't know what I looked like, go in as a kind of a secret shopper and see what it was like to shop at Wegmans because I'd never been to a Wegmans before. So I went into this Wegmans and I decided to subject a random employee to what I consider to be the ultimate test of customer service commitment and store knowledge in a grocery store. And that is to ask someone where I can find the canned fried onions. And I see some of you are chuckling because you know the problem with where to find the canned fried onions. You can't find it. You don't know where they are. And some of you are saying, what is this man talking about? And others of you, especially the native Floridians in the group, or the Southerners in the group at least, know exactly what I'm talking about. Canned fried onions were designed and developed by food scientists many decades ago to serve one purpose and one purpose only. And what is that? To rest atop green bean casserole, right? Exactly, yeah. I mean, you know these things. These things are indigenous to church suppers. Where I come from, if somebody dies, there will be a green bean casserole brought to your house, right? So I subjected this one random employee. His name is Philip. He is the sushi chef at this Wegmans supermarket. And I subjected him to that test. Where can I find the canned fried onions? With great enthusiasm and without so much as confronting or consulting a store directory, Philip took me right to the canned fried onions. He knew exactly where they were. Now, I don't know about you, but usually when I ask someone where I can find something in a supermarket, I'll kind of point off in a vague direction and wish me Godspeed. But he took me there and he was so enthusiastic. He got down on the bottom shelf. These things get no respect. And he handed me this can of 69-cent onions with great flourish. I thanked him kindly for it. And then he said, I said, yeah, thank you. He said, have you ever been to our store before? But again, he didn't know I was a visitor coming in for a tour a little bit. I said, no, actually, I've never been to a Wegmans at all. He said, oh, great, come over here. I want to show you our display of Alaska king crab legs. It's a sampling, a tasting. Come on, you're not allergic to shellfish, are you? Okay, great. Have some of this. And then he goes over and he wants to show me another little station where they have tastings of artisanal olive oil. So I'm like down in shots of olive oil. This guy is so into his work. I'm looking to see if his name tags, if his last name is Wegman or something, but it's not. So I thanked him kindly. I did not have the heart to put the onions back on the shelf. I was staying with some friends in Syracuse that night. I took them home to them. I'm sure they made a dandy casserole with them at some point. But a few minutes later, I came in for my appointment and I said to the manager, can you introduce me perhaps to someone whom we would describe as an extra miler, someone who regularly goes above and beyond in the course of doing their work. And he said, I have a lot of them here, but one who I know is here. Let's go meet our sushi chef, Philip. So we went back and Philip looked at me as if, uh-oh, what did I do? You again. I explained to him why I was there. And I said, Philip, your manager has pointed you out as an extra miler. I've been on the receiving end of this. I got to ask you, why are you so into that? I mean, dude, it's a grocery store, but why are you so into your work? He said, I can tell you that quite simply. He told me a little bit about his background and about his story. He had come to the United States 25 years before as a recent high school graduate from the Philippines with 6 of his 7 siblings. Eldest sister stayed in the Philippines. Everyone settled in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, except for Philip, and he moved up close to Syracuse. He said about a year ago, my eldest sister, the one who had remained in the Philippines, and she had never been to the US and none of us had ever been back over there, announced she was coming to visit the US for 3 months. Well, she was going to be staying with all of the other siblings down in Cherry Hill, not in the Syracuse area. So Philip was trying to figure out how he can mash together all of his PTO and sick time and vacation and maybe take some time without pay and try to get a big contiguous chunk because he didn't want to drive back and forth. It's about a 6-hour drive. He didn't want to keep driving back and forth on the weekends or on his day off to see this long lost sister. His manager found out about what was going on and he said, wait a minute, Philip. He said, you know, we've got a store down in Cherry Hill. He said, why don't we just plug you in down there for about 3 months? How would that be? And Philip looked at me and he said, you know, I decided on that day, they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to do that. I decided from now on, I'm going to start doing some things around here that I don't have to do. And I think that's the nature of discretionary effort and of engagement, is that we're asking people to do things they don't have to do. Probably the best way to make that happen is for us to do some things we don't have to do either. But I also want to be very clear that engagement is not about, or treating people right is not about lowering the bar, about lowering our standards. It's not about letting people do whatever they want. It's not about giving them stuff they haven't earned or deserved that you can't afford. It's not about coddling, and it is not a program. Instead, it's about really understanding what people want and saying, what can we do to provide that? So we know that people have a strong desire for a clear purpose and direction in their work. We'll talk about that. People want to know that they're doing meaningful work. People want and need a living wage. They want the chance to grow, to get better, to develop. And as you have already pointed out in a number of places, they want to have a life in addition to a job. So how do we begin to do that? Well, I think one of the first things we have to look at is we need to connect people very strongly to the mission of our organization. And so I have an assignment for you. We've got to connect every team member to the mission of your club. Now, I'm just wondering, and if I were to ask for a vote on this, but I won't, I bet most of you have a mission statement in your club. Well, here's the thing. If you do, that's great. The problem is nobody cares. Nobody cares about your mission statement. But if you've hired the right people, they do care about your mission. It's just not about the statement. So I'll give you an example. My wife, we've been married for 34 years. My wife was born and raised in Scotland. We spend time over there when we can, when they will let us in the country, which is not at the moment, but we hope to get back soon. In fact, our daughter lives in Scotland, in Glasgow. But a couple of years ago, we were visiting in the city of Edinburgh. And there in the middle of the town, I saw this sign. And you might, well, why did I even take a picture of that sign? Because I'm thinking, clairvoyant gather. Why would these people need a sign? Here's the thing. Your people are not clairvoyant. Apparently, neither are they. But they need to hear it from you, from their leaders. What is our mission? What is important around here? And again, it's not about a mission statement. If you do need a new mission statement, I can recommend a book. It's a great book. It's a real book. I didn't make this up. The Mission Statement book, 301 Corporate Mission Statements from America's Top Companies, $17.95. And in this book, you will find such amazing things such amazing mission statements as this. Here's my favorite one. Our mission is to maximize shareholder value and satisfy our company's needs while providing the employees a rewarding and productive work environment and conducting our affairs responsibly in the community. We will accomplish this mission by creating a corporate vision of successful growth by carefully managing our assets and by integrating our business through effective planning and allocation of resources. Well, I'm pumped, aren't you? What does this even mean? We talked about Chick-fil-A. They just have a little different view of this whole mission thing. Now do this for me. Pretend you're at the eye doctor getting your annual eye exam. Which is clearer, A or B? See, it just doesn't have to be that complicated. But it does have to come from here. It has to come from the heart. And so I love this quote by Charlie Parker, the jazz musician from years ago. In talking about music, he said, if you don't live it, it won't come out of your horn. If you don't live it, it won't come out of your horn. And so the question I have for you is, what is coming out of your horn? And I've got a great assignment for you where you can find out. This is my favorite assignment of the whole list. And it says to do this. I want you to go back, when you get back to your club, you're already in your club, but when you're finished with this today, I want you to go back and ask 5 or 6 employees at your club, not to drop the microphone. I want you to ask 5 or 6 employees at your club, what are our top 3 priorities? What are our top 3 priorities? Before you ask that question, I want you to write down those answers for yourself. What do you think your club's top 3 priorities are? Put them in a Post-it note, on a Post-it note, put them in your pocket. Go out and ask your people. You're looking for consistency, because if you ask 6 people for 3 priorities and you get 18 priorities, and I've seen that happen, you could have really well-meaning people working on so many things that nothing reaches critical mass. But if you have 6 people, you ask 6 people and you get 3 priorities among them, or 4, maybe 5, I can show you an organization that is really focused on what their priorities are. Give that a try. See how close people are in their perceptions of what your priorities are. And if you find that it's too all over the map, work hard to concentrate people's efforts on the real priorities. So now we need to talk about something else. And I get this question a lot, and I know that this is an issue for you, and that is, what do we do about these people, about these young people coming in? And I hear so much about the difference in young people and people maybe of your generation, my generation. But I think what we have to do is recognize that there are 2 types of organizations when it comes to looking at our young workforce. There are those who whine and complain about the younger workforce, that they don't have the work ethic, that they don't have the same values that we did. There are those, and then there are others who recognize that what they must do is to adapt themselves to burn the available fuel. The workforce that we have is the workforce that we have. You have a choice. Do you want to change an entire generation of workers? Or do you want to, as many of you have already suggested is critically important, do you want to adapt your organization to burn the available fuel? And let's be really honest, that available fuel today is coming at a really high price. I probably don't have to tell you this, but the price of that fuel has really gone up, like a lot. And it gives me no joy in saying this, but I feel like I have to. Because if you want to drive, you got to buy the gas, right? And the price has gone up. And the primary reason that that has happened so much in the last year, at least, is, and so one of the reasons that we find ourselves in a whole new world when it comes to a lot of things, especially in the workforce, is because this happened. Yeah. And we don't have to like it. And we don't even have to agree or even talk about any of the controversial aspects of the virus. But one thing we don't have the luxury of doing is ignoring that it happened and that it is still impacting our world. Along about May or June of last year, you heard it, people started talking about and using the term post-COVID. And while that term may apply in some areas of our lives, I don't think it's the best term to describe the workplace of now or the future, really, because the changes we're living with in the world of work today, many of them, not all of them, but many of them came about because of COVID. But many were in the works before COVID ever happened. The pandemic just highlighted and accelerated what was already happening. And so I think rather than talking about the post-COVID workplace, I think we need to talk about workplace next. And that's where we're going to go for the next little while in this presentation, talking about workplace next and what that really looks like for us now. Now, I'm assuming most of us, if not all, live in Florida at least part of the year. And every year we hear warnings about rip currents, those invisible but powerful and deadly underwater streams that so often and tragically win against those who fight against them. The survivors, interestingly enough, are those who, contrary to instinct, swim parallel to shore, usually to safety and to a lesson never forgotten. Well, the massive tsunami that roared into the global workplace in March of 2020 has left behind a powerful rip current, a current that many of us are fighting with all our might. And just like the swimmers who try to do battle with a force unquestionably stronger than they are, those who fight this workplace wave, I think, are doomed to a similar fate. But those who accept what's happening and adapt their organizations to it, I think those are the ones who are going to end up safely on shore. Maybe a little out of breath, but in a much better position to compete than those who fight it. Let's look at some numbers. Now, Florida has a history of low unemployment, but like almost everywhere else, unemployment spiked at the beginning of the pandemic, and it has almost recovered. It was 3.3% before the pandemic, but let's be honest. We all know that when adjusted for those who could pass a drug test and a background check, the effective unemployment rate was not 3.3, it was more like really 0.0, right? And you know how in Florida we always talk about the feels like temperature? Well, it's like 96 degrees outside, but it feels like 189 or something. Well, everyone I talk to says that while the unemployment rate may officially be 4.9, I actually just saw in the paper today it went up to 5 in Florida, it feels like it's a lot lower. And so the gap between these two purple lines that you see on the screen, that gap is as a result of the disruption in the labor market, as a result not of the coronavirus itself, but of the nearly year and a half that we've lived to one degree or another under some pandemic conditions. So a lot of the businesses I talk with are dealing with the whole work from home thing. Do we come back all the time, part of the time? Well, that's not so much of an issue in your world, except maybe is it? Because you may not have those kinds of decisions to make. You may not have very many, you might have a few, but you don't have very many jobs where people even could do them from home. But here's what you are facing, and we cannot ignore this. A lot of your people may have had to choose between working in your club, in food service, or outside, or in maintenance, or at the grounds, at the golf course, any of these jobs that your club offers. They may have had to choose between that and working in an office somewhere. They chose to work at a club rather than a cubicle farm. But today's talent competition, now they're thinking maybe this image, the one on the right, might not look so bad. And so again, while you don't have jobs that can be done from home, you are competing in a workforce where that is now a real possibility. And so what we find ourselves competing against is the flexibility that offers, compensation from other kinds of jobs, and also working conditions. And so I'd really like for you to think about what are the things that we can do to fight against some might see as a disadvantage in some of those areas and to make them an advantage. So it's time now to go to another Mentimeter question. And in this case, I'm going to ask Bree if she'll go ahead and put that Mentimeter poll up on the screen. You should see it changing on your phone. And the next question that we're going to ask is, for you, on a scale of 0 to 10, how big a deal is the current staffing shortage at your club? I just want to see where you are and where we are as an average in the group, and where that is. How big a deal is the current staffing shortage in your club? So we're getting some people coming in right now. It's about a 6.7 on a scale of 0 to 10. 22 people have responded already. Good. 25. All the way from what staff shortage to it's a huge deal, it's killing us. All right, we're getting 30 people. So we have a few people who say it's not really a big deal. We have a pretty large number. When you look at those curves and waves in the graph there, it tells us where we are. So we have a lot of people saying that it is, actually a lot of people saying that it's on the lower end, but those of you who are saying it's on the higher end are saying it's really high, really, really getting you. So with about 35 people voting on this, we're seeing that it's close to 68, 70% on a scale of 0 to 100. And that's pretty much what I expected to see. We're seeing this in every industry, but particularly in hospitality, food service, recreation, and the area. I mean, as you know, the whole club business is kind of a business unto its own. It is hospitality, but it's not. It is recreation, but it's not. It is food service, but it's not. So thank you, Bree. We can go ahead and take that off the screen. But I think that that's pretty much what we're seeing. So let's talk about some things we can do and what else we're seeing with this. I mean, we have to talk, and I'm going to be real frank and real blunt in some ways here. We have to talk data. There are some things we know. Quit rates are the highest they've been since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started measuring them. More than 4 million people have already quit their jobs this year. It's been called the Great Awakening in certain fields, food and beverage being chief among them. And other low wage earners have kind of reached a breaking point. And it's not just about the money. I mean, it is about the money, but it's also about the fact that what people do in your organizations is hard work. And you know, how much sense does it make for me to work this hard for this little when I see so many others around me doing what looks like easier work and making more money? I mean, you and I would have the same conversations with ourselves if we were in those positions. What you see in the upper right on the screen is a picture, is just a sign at a Burger King. I mean, everybody quit, we're closed. And what we're seeing is people are voting with their feet. So now it's time to talk about this fellow. We talk about a labor shortage. Folks, we don't have a labor shortage. We have a wage shortage. We don't have any more of a labor shortage than we had before COVID, except for those who lost their lives during COVID, and that's not an insignificant number. But the death rate was kinder to the workforce than to the population as a whole. But other than that, people didn't go anywhere. And I know it's not a popular position. It's very tempting to blame the problem on how much unemployment compensation people are getting. Of course, it makes perfect sense to say, well, you know, why should I go to work if the government's going to pay me not to? And the only problem is there's actually several problems with that argument, but the biggest problem is that the numbers just don't support it. I wish I could say that they did, but they don't, not even close. I mean, there are people saying that, people saying, why should I work? The government's paying me not to. And there's no denying that that is having some impact on the situation. Unfortunately, we have wildly overestimated that impact. The fact is there just aren't enough people. I mean, not nearly enough people collecting unemployment to explain the magnitude of the labor shortage. And here's what I mean. According to the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, we have more than 460,000 jobs. That's within shooting range of 500,000 jobs available in the state of Florida today that are unfilled. Fewer than 150,000 Floridians are actually receiving any unemployment benefits at all. So if every Floridian receiving unemployment were the type of person to say, I'll take the government's money rather than work, I think even the most cynical among us would probably have to allow that's not everybody who feels that way. But even if they did, that issue fails miserably in explaining fully 2/3 of the problem. I mean, Florida already has some of the lowest unemployment benefits in the country. And if you're, and please understand what, where I'm coming from with this, but if you're competing against some of the lowest unemployment benefits in the country, you have to ask just how little are you paying people? And it's no surprise that with this great awakening brought about by the pandemic, you're having a hard time attracting and keeping people. And I think we're about to find out if the additional unemployment benefits are to blame for the problem, because that $300 weekly additional benefit, that ended nearly a month ago. And then there's all kind of other federal benefits, the pandemic unemployment assistance, mixed earners unemployment compensation, pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. All of that is going to end, ironically enough, on Labor Day this year. So here's the thing. I think we can use unemployment benefits as an excuse for not being able to find staff, or we can choose to beat the labor competition by making it less of an issue. And I've worked really hard to try to figure out how claiming that unemployment compensation is the main reason for the labor shortage without doing anything can actually help us find more people to work. So let's move in that direction. And I think it's going to be more than simply compensation. You're going to have to provide benefits, things like healthcare, dental, sick pay. And if you want to stand out, probably paid vacation, tuition, childcare, things like that. And when it comes to childcare, my gosh, I think you see that gap again that I talked about earlier between what it feels like and what it actually is. A lot of that is coming from the fact that many people who are in your workforce simply cannot find childcare, and that is affecting their decision about whether or not to go to work. You know that you're competing with companies like the ones you see on the screen that have significantly raised their wages. They're offering obscene signing bonuses, and they're offering benefits. And now, my gosh, you're even competing with a gas station. Here's Buc-ee's, and look what they're offering. So I think we have to really take stock. What is it that we're going to be able to do, and how are we going to do it? And let me give you an example. So here's a company, and you may have seen this on the news, Claiborne's Ice Cream Shop in Pittsburgh. More than doubled its starting wage this year. That's a huge cost. But as soon as it was announced on Facebook, by the way, they had more than 1,000 applications, and they filled every spot overnight. So the owner, Jacob Hanchar, noted that before people were working 2 to 3 jobs. Now they're working just one. They're showing up. They're showing up on time. They're in a better mood. Morale has improved. That's resulting in better customer service. Imagine that. And his turnover cost has dropped significantly. And he has managed to keep all his more tenured workers, which has really been helpful in training the new ones. Let's talk about this relationship. You have tangibles, that's the pay and benefits. You have the intangibles, everything else we've talked about. Leadership, the culture, how much you care about your employees and how it shows. In a perfect world, those things would be balanced. But in reality, we know that if we don't pay attention to those intangibles, the pressure goes up on the tangibles. At the same time, and I don't want to say that you can ignore the wave in people not working because they want to make more money. But I am saying that if we focus on those intangibles, it's going to reduce the pressure on the pay and compensation. We've got to start hiring people who fit with the organization, values and attitudes first, and then skills and experience, not the other way around. This is a recruiting ad from Southwest Airlines. To me, it tells me you kind of got to have a pretty good sense of humor if you're going to be happy, productive, and successful working at Southwest. But seriously, this is what the folks at Southwest have told me that they're looking for in their frontline employees. People who listen, smile, care, and say thank you. And that might not be your list, but I'm wondering if you even have a list. Have you articulated what are the things that we need to really focus on in hiring to make sure we have people who have the potential to be happy, productive, and successful and do great work here? Bill Marriott said in a book, it's more important to hire people with the right qualities than with specific experience. And so the assignment I have for you here is when you get back with your leadership team, I want you to sit down and identify a few non-technical fit requirements, the more values and attitude requirements. And I want you to interview with that in mind. And to help you with that, there is something you can download if you go to the page, which I will give you at the end of this presentation, that will help you in interviewing for specific things like rapport building, initiative, flexibility, tolerance for repetitive tasks, decisiveness, attention to detail, and 20 or so other qualities. When it comes to recruiting, we got to never stop recruiting. And admit it, you did stop for a while, and we got to make sure that we're always looking. What we're going through right now is eventually going to be relieved to some degree. Please promise me that once you're fully staffed, you won't stop looking. When you find great people, you need to find a way to get them on board. We need to talk to 8th graders. By this, I mean we need to be recruiting at the middle school level. You need to be out there talking in middle schools, doing job fairs, doing education to help people at that age. If we wait until high school or college, it's too late. Let them know that working in the private club industry is a great career. We need to offer job trials. Let people come in, work for a few days, pay them for it. If it doesn't work out, we part on good terms. That way you don't get into bringing people in for something that looks permanent that never can be. And then you were talking about onboarding. Wow, this is something that I really feel strongly about, and I call it re-recruiting. And that is The Art of the Bodacious Welcome. It is onboarding on steroids. There is a downloadable article for you to read there that talks about things that you can do to make people really know that they have made the best decision by coming to work at your club. This gets people engaged in a fresh, fast way from the very beginning. And we know that when we have a strong onboarding, that it increases retention by more than 60%. Please take a look at that. I want you to look at how you look on Glassdoor. And I know everybody hates Glassdoor. Doesn't matter that you hate it. Glassdoor exists. No self-respecting job seeker is going to consider coming to work for your club without checking you out on Glassdoor. And you know what it looks like. You might get a really great review that looks like this. It's the best job I've ever had. Or you might get a clunker that says, unless it's a choice between working here and starving to death, keep looking. And that's what you're going to have. And if your reviews look like the ones on the top, you're going to get great people applying. If it looks like the one on the bottom, not so much. We got to talk about this whole no tip wave that started long before the pandemic and it fizzled out, and we're seeing that it might be coming back. In fact, a famous example is Zazie restaurant in San Francisco. They did make it work. But you know what? It wasn't just no tips and we raise our salaries 20%. It was a combination where they raised their prices, their menu prices, they eliminated tips, they raised their wages, but they also included an incentive component in that. And I think that is critical. The pandemic has resurrected a lot of talk about trying tip-free again. And there's good evidence that it can work, and it works better in upscale dining than it does on the budget end. But to make it work, I think you got to give both the front and the back of the house some skin in the game in terms of quality and service. So don't just double their hourly wage. Increase it by some increment and then give everyone the opportunity to earn more, depending on how well the club, or in some cases, their particular area does. And yes, you have to raise menu prices to pay for it. And if you're going to do that, you have to be very transparent with your members about why you're doing that. It will work for some of you. Give it a try. But you got to pay for that somehow. And so I think one thing we have to really focus on is how can we double down on our food costs? The waste in fine dining is outrageous. You know it, you see it. Let's take a harder look. Let's sharpen that pencil and let's look at portions. Let's look at what people really want and make sure that we're not wasting anything that we don't have to waste. That could pay for a big chunk of what you're going to have to do to attract and keep your staff. Some clubs have found that some relief in doing something they never wanted to do, and that is to scale back a little bit. They're limiting tables, actually getting rid of the tables that they know they're not going to fill because they don't have the staff to serve them. And it's a lot better than having a lot of empty tables that your members and guests can see. Consider a simpler menu. That'll save you time and money in the kitchen and in the dining room and everywhere else you serve food and drinks. And I think your guests would rather you do what you can do and do it really well than to try to do it all and fail at some of it. And it may be something that you do for a period of time. And once the staffing shortage, you've been able to relieve that in your club, then you may be able to go back to some other offerings. Take advantage of technology to reduce the dependence on labor. Point of sale technology, stuff in the kitchen, in the clubhouses, on the golf course. It's an investment that could really pay off in terms of reducing the number of people that you need to drive your operation. You're always going to need people, though, good people. I want to suggest job fairs. Here's an example of a job fair from another club. This is a club in New Hampshire, and they actually put this out all over social media. They invited people from the restaurant industry. They invited employees in restaurants and hotels and everywhere, in athletics and everything they could think of. They asked their employees to spread the word. They had a huge response to this. Think about job fairs. Think about kind of getting to the competition for labor and making sure that they know where you are and that it's a great place to work. What about your website? We've got to start looking at our website and see, are we using our website to attract and retain people? So here's the thing. You're looking right here at a website from a club in Texas. Why not Florida? I looked at about 12 different private clubs in Florida, website, couldn't find anything that would make me want to apply for a job there. We're going to actually take a quick look at this is a real website for a company. It's Brenham Country Club in Texas. And this isn't even great, but it's better than what I saw in a lot of instances when I went looking. At least they have mentioned what it's like to work there. They're talking about some of the openings, some of the positions and the opportunities. You already have a website. You are paying for that asset. Let's use it in a way that helps people to find us so that you can find them. Oh, let's change the view. There we go. What about exit interviews and employee surveys? Are you asking people why they're leaving, when they're leaving? And even better than that, because that's really like an autopsy, but are you asking people, what could we do better? Full disclosure, our company provides employee surveys as a service. One of our largest survey clients is a little place you may have heard of, the Pebble Beach Resort in California. 1,800 employees. We've been doing their employee survey for 15 years. They've changed so much about how they manage and lead their workforce based on what they've learned from the survey. So another thing that you can download is a white paper on some things you may want to think about in doing employee surveys, and you'll get that information at the end of the presentation today. But finally, before we move on to the last topic, there is simply no substitute for spending one-on-one time with your staff. The club manager and every other manager in your club. You need to build relationships with everyone. Your servers, your bartenders, your dishwashers, kitchen line staff, groundskeepers, maintenance, everyone. I've seen clubs where the manager didn't even know the names of some of the people who were helping them to keep the doors open. I don't think anybody in this group is like that, but get to know them, talk to them, get to know who they are, what's important to them. And if you don't happen to speak their language, learn it. And if they don't speak your language or they don't speak English very well, help them to learn English. You won't get that at Burger King. It is about more than anything else. Remember what I said earlier. Engagement is deeply personal. So one of the last things that we learned in looking at Contented Cow organizations is that their people are cared about. People reserve their best effort for a leader who cares about them. If you care, number one, you tell people the truth, even the ugly truth, the hard truth about the organization, about their performance, about whatever is true. You tell them the truth. But also, if you care, you say thank you, and you say thank you a lot. So I want to ask you again, we were going to do this in a breakout, but we're going to do it in a different way now. I want you to ask you, just as you did before in the chat, just to share with us, what are some things that you do to say thanks to your employees? And we're going to look at the chat stream and see what great ideas you're going to share. This is one of my favorite parts of a presentation like this, is where you get to share with each other what you are all doing. So let's take a quick look at that. Look at the chat. If you'll just go into the chat and start typing, what do you do to say thanks to your employees? Give us some ideas. Okay, so we're getting kudos staff. Take a victory lap at the end of a busy shift. Always walk around and thank them individually. I love that. That is a great idea. Immediate and individualized. Ice cream truck in the summer. Who doesn't like ice cream anywhere, anytime? Give out gift certificates. Employee parties. Weekly update to department. Publicly recognize those who do something amazing. High fives. Okay. Member golf cart parade, over 2 miles long with golf carts decorated with staff names. I love that one. That is amazing. Great. Sincere thank you, and often, yes. Team lunches, gift card, incentives, recognition of previous day's accomplishments in the morning meeting. I especially love that idea. Morning huddles. Look at what has happened over the previous 24 hours, highlight it. That way you get the very best return on that investment of talking about it. Team member outings, baseball games, movie theater nights, pool party at the club with family and zoo trips. Gift cards, free food, additional time off, cater in a special lunch once a month. No one has to cook. No, I love that, especially for the people who do have to cook. Do that. Yeah, really create that event for them. Bring them out after events and thank them by name in front of our members. What an amazing idea. I hope everybody's going to write that one down. Yeah, after you've had a big event, these are the people who are in the back who are making this event happen, and they so often don't get the attention and the recognition that they deserve. Bring them out. They're not going to get that at Burger King either. What else are we getting? 30, 60, 90-day gift with new employees. Excellent. That's going to be part of what you'll read when you look at re-recruiting, the art of the bodacious welcome. Members do an employee golf tournament. They make all the food and serve the employees. Members serve the employees. I love it. We're getting some great ideas here. Send all employees handwritten birthday cards with a personalized message. Employee outings, which can create team bonding. Let me just add to the birthday card thing something that I heard at a club, sometime in the last year, a couple of years ago, before the pandemic, and that was birthday cards for the employees' kids. If you get that information, if you have that information for any child under 18, sending a birthday card to that employee's home, to that child, they love it. Extra miler gets to be a member for the day. Wow, this is really good stuff. Keep going. What are some other great ideas you've got? Come on, we got to have one more. What are we getting? Did we cover all of this? Okay, employee of the month designated parking space with their choice. Oh, of their choice, space of their choice with a sign. Yeah, have them get the place that works best for them. So those are great ideas that you have shared with yourselves. Wowing, so you can identify team members laterally and thank them. Again, all of this will be available for you. We'll summarize the chat and send this to Beth. Good. All right. So I tell you what, let's look at some other ideas. Yeah, great suggestions. Thank you. Let's look at some other ideas maybe that you haven't discussed, and some of these you have. But here's some things that I'm hearing, that I see as I work with organizations that are doing a great job of thanking their employees. And the first thing, I love this quote from Napoleon Bonaparte. It says, a man will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most expensive thing, the most expensive gift. Something like what you've already mentioned, similar, a handwritten thank you note mailed to their home. When you get home today, you're going to look at your mail, and if you have anything that is not a bill or a credit card offer or an advertisement for something, you will be surprised and it will stand out. Send a thank you, and it's fine to give it to them, to hand it to them, that's fine. But you know what? Mail it to their home, especially if you know they live with others, and then they get a little recognition among their family and those whom they live with. Similar to what you said before, make a special call, go by a special call or a special visit just to say thanks to that person. No other reason, but just to say thanks. Something else we know we have to include, and that is families. Someone talked about being inclusive a little bit earlier. And in thanking your employees, include their families as well. Their families are often doing as much sacrificing almost as the employee themselves. And so if you're going to do something, include the families. One of those things you can do, and I love this one, just have dinner delivered to an employee's home. DoorDash and Grubhub and all of these, and Uber Eats are pretty active these days. Have dinner delivered to an employee's home as a way of making a special thanks for them. Those are just a few ideas. If you care, you do what I call sitting on the footlocker. It's an old military term. I was not in the military, but it refers to the idea of just going out there and just being with your people for no specific reason, but to spend time and to get to know them. I talked about that a little bit earlier. And if you're going to do this, I have a list of 11 questions. I'm going to put them on the screen, but they're way small. It's the ugliest PowerPoint slide you will ever see me do. But it is in the material that you can download at the end. 11 questions that I think every manager should know about everyone who works with him or her. Questions like, what do you do for fun outside of work? How do you get to work? What's your morning look like before you get here? What are you having trouble with that you could use help with? So things like that, you'll be able to see that on the list of key takeaways. If you care, you lead with kindness and empathy. You talked about Chick-fil-A. We've already mentioned them a time or two here. I had a great privilege a few years ago to travel with Dan Cathy, who is now the CEO of Chick-fil-A, the son of the founder, Truett Cathy, to travel with him on a series of grand opening trips. On one of those trips, we were in Des Moines, Iowa, and he was speaking to new managers in that area, which they had just opened up in that region of the Midwest. And I loved what he said to this group of managers as he was trying to orient them into the Chick-fil-A culture and way. He said, when a team member is enduring a personal hardship, we want you to go above and beyond for that person. When you do, you will have their full attention when you talk about going above and beyond for their customers. You'll have their full attention. Before we close, I do want to give you the opportunity to download some key takeaways. I didn't give this to you at the beginning because then you would do like you do in church and read the bulletin during the sermon. But I'm going to ask you to download this. If you will, you can grab that QR code with your phone, or, and Bree is going to put this in the chat, you can simply go to contentedcows.com/FLCMAA. And I'll provide that also to Beth. And this will take you to a page where you can download the slides, you can download the key takeaways, you can download a number of articles. The one I talked about with onboarding on steroids, the art of the bodacious welcome. We'll talk, there's a white paper on the best things to think about in terms of doing surveys, and that interview guide, which actually gives you questions that you can ask. It actually gives you the wording of the questions that you can ask to get at certain non-skill specific, but more value and attitude related qualities. The last thing that we know is that if you're a great place to work, and Contented Cow organizations create not only a workplace, but they create a community. Think about this. It's pretty easy to leave a job. It's much less easy, much more difficult to leave a community. One of the things that you're going to find, and again, you've got to do all of these other things that we talked about, and I can't overemphasize how we're going to really probably have to change the way we think about compensation and how we're going to be able to compete against all of those other jobs that are out there. But that alone will not do it without the more intangible qualities of what we've talked about. And one of those things is to build a sense of community in your organization. So a few years ago, I became aware of a company called Plantronics, and actually Plamex, which is the Mexican division of that company. They make headsets. You've probably all seen them. Probably your receptionists have Plantronics headsets. They were named as the best company to work for in Mexico for a number of years running. I got on the phone with the CEO of Plamex, the Mexican division, Alejandro Bustamante. We got talking. He said, I can tell you about this, but you're never really going to see what the great things that we're doing down here unless you come down and visit. So I got a free all expense paid trip to Tijuana, Mexico, where I saw their workforce and their work team and listened to many stories about why they're known as a great place to work. And here's was perhaps the most fascinating story that Alejandro told me. He said, I learned when I came on, he was Mexican, but he had lived for a long time in the United States. He said, I learned that at the time, Mexican law required you, in order to get a marriage license, you had to have your original birth certificate, which you could only get by going home to your town of birth. Very difficult for people to do. So people were living together, not getting married. That's a problem in this culture, but they were doing it. He said, I can't solve everything, but I can solve this. He told everyone, take a week. Anybody who wants to get married, take a week with pay. It won't count against your vacation. I won't even ask you if that's really what you're doing. Go home, get your birth certificate, come back, you can get married. In doing that, 24 people took him up on it the first year. He said, let's just have a mass wedding here in the plant, which they did. Here's a picture from one of those weddings. Every year since then, on the Saturday closest to Valentine's Day, at the Plantronics plant in Tijuana, Mexico, they have a mass wedding in the factory. Even though 6 years ago, the company successfully lobbied the Mexican government to change the regulations so you don't have to have your original birth certificate. What they've done, first of all, this gives a whole different meaning to the term employee engagement, doesn't it? What they've done is to create a community, and the 2,400 people who work there in one of the most competitive areas for labor in the country of Mexico. They have an incredibly high engagement rate, incredibly low turnover rate. Create community. I want to close by reminding us of something that I said a little bit earlier. And that is that while work is contractual, engagement is deeply personal. The year was 1939. James Prentice was a sergeant major in the Gordon Highlanders, a Scottish regiment of the British Army in World War II. He was on the island of Orkney, way in the very north extremes of Scotland. One February of 1939, with 36 of his men, his platoon, on maneuvers in battles or in practice for the battles soon to come in far-off Burma. Suddenly, a strong snowstorm descended upon the island, and they were 5 miles from their base camp, and they could not get back. The sergeant major was more than a little relieved to see the dim lights of a farm oasis off in the distance. He knocked on the farmhouse door. The farmer came down, and the sergeant major said, "Could my men sleep in your barn for the night?" And the farmer said, "Yes, but only under one condition, and that is that everyone will come and have a hot meal in our kitchen before they retire." 36 men, very small, humble kitchen, rough-hewn wooden table. But 6 at a time, the sergeant major ushered those men in, where they enjoyed the best meal they would for the next 4 years, a meal, an inelegant feast of ground beef, turnips, carrots, and pancakes. Only when all 36 men had been served did the sergeant major take a place at the table to see if there was anything left, and there was. There was a 9-year-old boy sitting in the corner of the room, the farmer's son, and he was very curious about this. And he went up to the sergeant major and he said, "Why'd you go last? You're the boss man." And the sergeant major looked at him and he said, "Lad, first ye feed the troops. They're no use hungry. First you feed the troops. They're no use hungry." 40 years later, Jim Prentice found himself once again on the island of Orkney, this time not as a tourist, but this time, or not as a soldier, but as a tourist. This time accompanied by his wife and his daughter, who is now my wife. And as Jim went for what he would have called a wee donner, a short walk, he was looking for a pub, if you want to know. He came across the old farm. He didn't know if he would recognize it, but he did. And he said, "This is the place." And about that time, a man in his late 40s came walking across the field, and the 2 of them engaged. And Jim said, "Oh, you won't believe it. It was back during the war, and I was here, and the man came down, and it started to snow, and the farmer, and he said we had to come." And the man interrupted him, and he said, "First, you feed the troops." And Jim said, "Oh, you're not the wee boy." And the man said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "I've never forgotten that night, primarily because we didn't have anything for breakfast the next morning, but I've always remembered what you said. First, you feed the troops. They're no use hungry." He said, "I took over the management of this farm about 20 years ago and have always remembered and applied what you said. And we're doing pretty well." Folks, everybody is hungry for something. What are your people hungry for? Thank you.